welcome to the next episode of KD Recruitment's podcast called Recruitment Revolution. I am delighted to be joined today by Dr. Olga Frańczak, who is from the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. So Olga is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Lead over at the REC. I've worked with Olga a fair bit over the last couple of years, and currently you're there helping thousands of recruiters to support them on their ED&I journey with their clients and how they can support their clients to recruit and retain staff in this current climate more inclusively. So welcome, Olga. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a very, very hot topic at the moment is ED&I. I think the first thing to probably say actually is most people have their own way of saying whether it's ED&I, DE&I, or whatever it might be. I don't think there's a right term. It's whatever sits comfortably with you. For me, one of the reasons why I wanted to do today's podcast is we work with a lot of SME businesses who, when looking at their equality, diversity and inclusion, they don't think that they're doing enough, or they don't know where to start, and they need that support and guidance from somebody like me or other recruiters in the area. So I wanted to do a session focused on that for this podcast so that we can dispel some of the myths and give some really good practical advice and guidance and hints and tips for businesses across North and East Yorkshire to be able to sort of take away. I've got a client actually that I wanted to start with their story. So I work with a manufacturing business, and I went to see them at the beginning of this year to talk about their ED&I journey and where they were at, because it was very evident that they're a great employer, and when it comes to attracting the right kind of candidates, they look after their people. But one of the things that they hadn't done was talk about the support that they offer and how inclusive they are as an employer. And when I went out to see them, the managing director talked to me about some really, really great things that they were doing around accessibility. So they had a lift within the building so that if somebody had any form of disabilities, that you didn't necessarily have to take the stairs. They had a lift available. They had ground floor offices and desks as well as first floor, so you could kind of pick and choose where you wanted to be. They had a room that they were setting up that was going to be multifunctional, so whether that's a multifaith room or it was going to be a quiet space. So anybody could go in there and just take some time out, whether it was for your faith or whether you were neurodiverse and needed that quiet space. So they were setting that up. And they had made really good steps in the right direction in terms of supporting the female workers with menopause support as well. And there were some really great things that they were talking about, but they weren't promoting any of this on their website or their social media channels, or when they were recruiting, like none of this was being talked about. And when I asked him why, he sort of said, well, we're not able to support every form of ED&I. So therefore, I don't want to kind of talk about this because there's other areas in terms of having a multi-faith workforce and people from different religious backgrounds and different beliefs and, things like that. And I said, but geographically where you're based, is that because accessibility to where you're based is that those people don't necessarily live in those areas? And he said, well, actually, yeah, you're probably right, because we have staff in other countries who do come from different backgrounds. It is mainly just the UK-based business that doesn't. And I said, is it a case of you don't have anybody yet? And he said, yes. I said, right, so if that person applied and they were the right person for the job, would you hire them? And he said, absolutely, of course. I said, well, therefore, you have thought about this. And he talked to me about this room that they were setting up that could be a multi-faith room or a quiet room or whatever it could be. And I said, well, you are making really good strides. And it's not that you don't, you just haven't yet. And he said, yes, I've never thought about it like that. And I think that's the story that I hear from quite a lot of our clients, is that they're doing certain things, but because they don't feel like they're ticking every box, they're not publicising it. And I think I wanted to kind of hear sort of from you, because obviously you speak to kind of recruiters all over the UK, and this is kind of your background. ED&I is your passion. So, are you hearing similar things, or what's your take on the market at the moment?
Thank you. No, absolutely. Definitely, ED&I can be a very scary topic. It is oftentimes seen, as you very rightfully pointed out, that, if I do something or say something slightly off, that I'm a terrible person. And especially if you go on LinkedIn, on Twitter, everyone seems to have it all figured out. Everyone just bragging about all of their successes. There seems to be little room for actual meaningful exchange and learning. And it can be scary then for employers to just enter that space and start making progress. And I really liked your point when you said about ED&I, DEI, and all these acronyms that show up, all over the internet, but essentially, referring to whatever that particular company is doing to improve, company culture, inclusion, and diversity. And what I often find is, because of that kind of culture of, I'm so scared I'm going to do the wrong thing, companies focus more on what acronym they're going to use and how they're going to call this, all of their planning. They're focused on that more than on the actual planning that they do. And that's something I definitely have a problem with, because I've had conversations with organizations when they would ask me, so which acronym should I use? And I would ask them, like, can you explain to me a bit more about what is your approach? And that didn't always seem to be actually the point of focus. They just wanted to make sure that they get the acronym right. So I absolutely agree with you that you can use whichever acronym feels right for your brand, for your organization. What matters is what you implement behind it. Obviously, don't get me wrong, words do matter and carry a lot of weight, but I feel like it's okay to take away some of that pressure from what acronym should I use and onto the actions that I will be taking.
Yeah.
So moving on to kind of the actions to be taken, I think, yes, absolutely. I'm hearing this more and more about, how do I even start this? How do I make sure that, I don't offend anyone? So I always say that to make it a bit less scary, actually find out what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
It is okay to start somewhere, because your company is in a specific sector, is in a specific place in the country, has a specific workforce, and it's okay to focus on the things that are relevant to you, to your workforce, to the place where you currently are at. So the first step always is to just get some sort of information about your staff, and what are the priorities for your organization, because of course you're going to be confused and scared to begin this whole development if you have no idea what it is that you're actually trying to do. So I always advise the first thing, to begin this ED&I development is actually what it is that I'm trying to do. What is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And it is okay to focus on that problem, because let's not forget that focusing on one area of ED&I will have a positive impact on all the other ones. Let's say if you want to start with gender equality, like, this will impact all the other protected characteristics as well, because you do have women who are disabled, women who are lesbians, women who are of different ages. So it's something to just keep in mind, that it's not that focusing on one area just kind of silos you there. It actually has positive impact on all the other ones. But just make sure that you're doing this in an authentic way, that it actually responds to the needs of your current workforce, as opposed to what you might have seen someone do on LinkedIn. And I definitely encourage all of employers to share what they're doing, like you said in your example, because we have increasingly examples of candidates refusing job offers for organizations that do not highlight their ED&I credentials. And I've also seen in the study done by Hayes that 72% of candidates would not even apply to an organization that does not provide kind of public commitment to ED&I. So especially in the current labor shortages, this is something for organizations to definitely start doing, but just doing it meaningfully and while addressing the actual needs of their current workforce.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. We are still in a climate of skill shortages, candidate shortages, and yes, the market's economically been a bit all over the place over the last sort of 6 to 9 months. But the good candidates are still hard to find and hard to attract and then retain. So I think you're absolutely right. When you said, actually starting with gender, I think is a really good place to start. One of the things that I find when I'm and my team, when we're interviewing candidates, we speak to them about the type of jobs that they're looking for and the culture and the values, what's important to them in their next employer. And we talk to them about the jobs that they've seen and the ones that they are looking to apply for. And one of the things that I see time and time again is adverts that are written. And either it's a copy and paste of a job description, or they are written using terminology that's not necessarily gender neutral, or there's a lot of masculine words in there rather than kind of the feminine side and things like that. And I think it takes a lot to write an advert that's going to attract everybody to apply. The best statistic that I've heard, and I say this all the time to my clients, is that unless a woman meets 100% of the requirements in an advert, she's not going to apply to that job. But if a man meets up to 60%, he will apply. So if you're looking to attract people and the things that you put in your advert are not going to make females apply, and you're sat there going, we've got a mainly male workforce, how do we get more women to apply? Then it's actually start with your advert. And really think about the words that you're using in there, think about the requirements that you're putting in there, and don't overcomplicate it. Keep it quite simple, but actually focus on who your audience is and who you want to attract and who you want to bring in for an interview, and tailor it towards them rather than a scattergun approach.
No, absolutely. I mean, just to be clear, I've used gender as an example, but organizations might choose something else to focus on in the first place. But I definitely agree with you that, you start attracting with the job description, really. And we see time and time again where job description has been written, a couple of years prior because of, a certain person that has had that position. And it just hasn't really been changed. So I think the first thing to do is to think very carefully about what is truly needed to do that job. Because what I see often employers do, and recruiters can definitely help with addressing that, is using certain shortcuts, like mental shortcuts, like I want someone who has had a similar role for the last 5 years, but what does that mean really? Because essentially, you are discouraging anyone who, maybe hasn't been in the professional space in that capacity for this many years. So someone who is a bit younger, but they might have actually led a very ambitious project, manage a very significant team, manage a massive budget. So actually what I always encourage employees to do is actually kind of challenge the job description a little bit and kind of candidate requirements. Is that, okay, so a person who's been in similar role for 5 years, what is it that, we actually want them to have done? As I said, is it managing team, big deals, et cetera, and I think that is something definitely to consider. But I would also add on to that, which is, job your advert, your job description is incredibly important, but where you share it is equally important. If you always use the same channels, it's not going to bring you different results. And what I often see employers do is, add at the end of their advert or their job description, that we welcome applications from people from all walks of life. And while it's definitely a right thing to do, I always encourage employers to add a little bit more nuance into that. Do you have an ED&I webpage that you can link there? Do you have any sort of priorities that you could quickly list in that brief paragraph? Just making it a little bit more meaningful. If I'm already at a second stage interview or something, is there anyone I could potentially contact to find out more about your equality, diversity, and inclusion issues, or is it just something that you took off the internet and placed on the job description? So definitely starting with thinking about the job description, but from a point of what is truly needed to do that job and how I can think effectively of different attraction channels.
And I had a meeting a few months ago, actually, with one of our clients who they have a fairly robust inclusive process. They have an application form rather than people sending CVs and things, and and they have all of that on the website. So they direct you to the careers page, and it does say on there, if you need anything, you can call this number. But one of the challenges that I faced to them was, if you've got somebody who is potentially dyslexic and they have taken a lot of time and a lot of support to create a CV, and they can't send that CV, and you're now asking them to write an application form, which is a massive struggle for them. But the job that they're going to go in and do, their dyslexia has no bearing on that, and they can be phenomenal at whatever job it is they're coming in to do. You've got a barrier there. That person probably won't apply because they'll sit there and go, I'm going to struggle filling that application form out. I've got my CV and it's taken me a long time to do this, but that application form puts a barrier up and they may not apply. And the other thing that came about was part of their recruitment process was that everybody did a presentation as part of the second stage. And again, it's because they said everybody does it. So they're trying to be, across the board, all inclusive. And I said, but again, what happens if you've got somebody who is neurodiverse, maybe on the autistic spectrum, who is phenomenal at IT, and they're going to come in and they're going to rewrite the coding for your internal computer software? If that person has to do a presentation, they won't do that. That will put the fear of God in them. And the last thing that they want to do is an interview, let alone a presentation. What they want you to do is go, here's a task, here's a project. You put some code in there and you create this for me, and they will show you what they're capable of. But they're not going to go through that process of doing a presentation and things like that. And actually, what this organisation that we worked with have done is re-looked at everything and gone, actually, there's certain roles where, yes, they have to have presentations, so they can't take that away. But the other ones, instead of it being a presentation, it's going to be a written piece of work that somebody can prepare in advance and send in. So they're not presenting, but they can still tweak it slightly. And as part of the application process, what they've done is change the wording on the website to say, if you need any additional support in completing this, call this number and we will be there to help you complete the application form. And they've said, if somebody sends us a CV and talks us through it, then we can probably type out the application for them, send it to them to check, and then they can send it back. And, and they sort of sat there and went, we'd never thought about that the barriers appear. They've tried to be as inclusive as possible, but then unintentionally have put these barriers up. But were really sort of quite small, simple changes that they've made, which have made all the difference. And it has completely sort of revolutionised kind of some of their recruitment practices by just thinking slightly outside of the box. But they've not reinvented the wheel.
Absolutely. And I think you just touch on a very key point here, which is keeping the learning mindset when it comes to equality, diversity, and inclusion. I always like to compare this kind of area to AI and like modern technology. It is also a very dynamic field. It is also something that has been quite a big topic lately, but actually has been around for a very long time. And it is also something where there is always more development. The moment you feel like you have it all figured out, you're just inviting some sort of hacker to go into your system and be like, I can tell you that is not true. And the same with ED&I. The moment you just come in onto LinkedIn and be like, we've solved this, you're just inviting some sort of competitor or some ED&I consultancy to use you as an example and say, hey, they didn't do this. So I feel like just keeping an open mind, and you've described this where you come in as a recruiter and say, have you actually thought that you might unintentionally create some barriers? And it's really great point on that employer to say, like, did not know that, let's rethink that. And I definitely also would like to kind of applaud your point when it comes to adjusting the recruitment process to what the job actually entails. Because once again, let's face it, everyone, like, humans are by nature lazy, and we like to make our lives as easy as possible. So we'd like to copy and paste, this presentation style worked for our finance director, so we also wanted to work for our head of IT. But it might be that it's a very, very different position. Does that include, does that role involve delivering presentations? Or is it actually that I'm using it once again as a shortcut to, check their skills? But do I check their presentation skills, or am I after their technical skills, which can be then designed in a very different way in terms of the task to complete? And I like to advise, anyone to essentially ask candidate this one question, which is, how can we help you thrive in this recruitment process? Because often if you ask about reasonable adjustments, candidates might not be quite clear, what is reasonable to ask, was it, am I allowed to ask for it? But if you leave it very open, asking, how can I help you thrive in this? You might then hear that, for instance, I really struggle with presentations, but I'm actually quite good at, writing, or the other way around. Could I, instead of submitting a paper, could I just record myself delivering it? And it doesn't have to be, like you say, reinventing the wheel, but just, we all want candidates to do as well as possible. It's not about catching them off guard or anything like that. So why not save ourselves also some time and say, how can I help you be your best self and showcase your biggest strengths in this interview process? And just another stat that came to my mind, I've seen that 72% of hiring managers think that they provide very clear job descriptions, but only 36% of candidates think that the job descriptions are actually clear, which again showcases that when you're living, in a certain silo, it's easy for you to just like use, too much jargon, too many acronyms. And it's not to say that, yes, the person working in that area should know these things, but, just like we talked with ED&I, companies might use different acronyms. So make sure that if you're looking for someone to work on ED&I, that you explain your acronym, because maybe this is the one that they haven't seen before yet. So yeah, just like kind of, that's something that recruiters can definitely do, which is looking at the job description and say, you know what, I don't actually fully understand what is needed from that person. Do you think we can dig a little bit deeper and actually see, like, is this actually saying what you wanted to be saying?
Yeah. And I think that's something that we've done quite a bit of, because we do a lot of this consultancy work with some of our clients. And I recently worked with a charity, and they don't have a HR provision or anything like that. And we were recruiting a couple of positions for them. But before I could recruit the positions, we had to go through a period of understanding of, well, where was the charity at the moment? Finding out what each person in the office did, because there was only 3 of them. and then finding out how can we make their lives easier. What support did they need? What duties did they need to pass on to somebody else? And we actually restructured the team. And then by restructuring the team, we were then able to look at, there was an additional admin role that we needed to recruit for, and then the senior role to oversee and run the charity. But the admin role was a result of this restructure because their existing admin didn't have capacity to take on any more. And the other two staff were basically working more than 40 hours a week, and that wasn't feasible. And the person who was leaving, I had a conversation with them and said, well, you can't re-recruit your job when you can't sit there and say, this is a 37.5-hour week when you're telling me you're working 16, 70 hours. So there has to be additional capacity. There has to be additional support brought in. So yeah, they restructured the team, worked out what each existing member of staff wanted to do, where the strengths were, what they were good at. And then everything that they sort of stripped away from those jobs gave us the duties for the additional hires. But they then tasked me with writing the job descriptions for them, because then based on the job descriptions, we could then write an effective advert and go through an effective recruitment process. So it was very much instead of just saying I need to hire, it was hang on a minute, let's go back a few steps before we start hiring somebody that you're not sure exactly what they're going to be doing. Let's get our ducks in a row first, and then look at what that job description looks like, what duties they're going to be doing, what kind of person spec you're looking for, what do the hours look like, and and actually have a consultation with your existing staff around that and make sure that that works for them as well. And then when we went to recruit, it was a more streamlined process. And then the person that they hired for the additional admin support, and then the senior person that they hired, it was a seamless transition into the business as well. And it just makes a massive difference that getting the job description correct, and then thinking about, well, what does this person look like in terms of that person spec? And I think the other part of that is kind of that culture fit as well. And one of the things that I hear time and time again, and it's in the world that we're in now in 2024, it blows my mind that I still get people say to me, I don't want somebody who's over the age of 50 because we're quite techie and there's a lot of different software packages here. And I don't think they're going to be able to pick it up because I've had somebody before and they couldn't. Or I don't want somebody between the ages of 25 and 40 because I've had too many pregnancies in the office and I can't afford to have any more. And and I get these questions, or it's a very male dominated team, so I can't really have another woman in the team, or it's a female dominated team and a man wouldn't fit in. And I hear this time and time again, and I do end up laughing sometimes, going, wow, we're still having these conversations. But I think the thing is that quite often it's not intentionally discriminating. It comes from a place of either they've had the fingers burnt in the past, or it's that assumption. So, I don't want somebody who's between 25 and 40 because I can't have anybody having any more children. And it's that assumption that all women want to have kids. And actually, well, what if they don't? And we have shared parental leave. So actually, it might be their partner that takes the parental leave and not them. And it's quite a young team. So, I want somebody young. And I mean, I used to have this amazing candidate years ago who was 60 and still went out clubbing every weekend, and she was amazing. And and she had this really, really funky hair, and she dressed amazing. And I was like, age is just a number. I was like, it's a stereotype that you think you don't want somebody who is a certain age, but it's not their personality. And recruitment for me is behaviors and attitude. So, these things like age and gender and it's all that bias. None of that comes into it. You want the right person to do the job, and it's irrelevant how old that person is, what they look like, what their beliefs are, whether they've got no children or 22 children. It's the right person for the right job. And ultimately, that's what most businesses want. They need guidance, I think, especially SMEs, on, well, how do we actually go about finding that right person? Because I think sometimes they think that by asking these questions, that's going to help them get there.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And I think, I mean, I'm so glad we touched on stereotypes because that was the topic of my PhD. So I definitely love talking about it. But there's a couple of things I want to unpack here. One of the things you did mention was about culture fit,
Yeah.
which is essentially sometimes a little, again, once again, the mental shortcut of for companies basically saying, we want someone who looks, thinks, and behaves like everyone else in the team because it just makes it easier to manage. And I think it's good to come at it sometimes from a point of compassion and kind of understanding, like, okay, you know, you think that managing such a homogenous group is easier. Fair enough. You know, have you heard about all those stats that showcase that teams that are more diverse are actually more creative? Have you noticed that there is a bit of stagnation in terms of the creativity and innovation in your team as opposed to maybe some of your competitors? Kind of starting from, you know, where that company is at, you know, I think is always a good, good point. And I would also highlight that often stereotypes are, you know, I like to call them benevolent stereotypes, where we feel like we are actually being caring and understanding. Oh, maybe there is a young mother that, you know, there is this big project coming up, but we're not going to make her the leader of that project because, you know, we don't want to put additional strain on her without really understanding, you know, what her personal professional priorities are, right? Or same thing might be with with a person you know, over 50 or over 60. And this particular stereotype, kind of, if you think about it, you know, it's kind of mind blowing that it still holds up because like in 2024, the person who is like over 60, they've been working with technology for decades now. It's not something that came up, you know, 2 years ago. This is something that's been around for such a long time. So again, thinking about, okay, so I'm using age as a shortcut, but, you know, I can think of my job description saying, I want someone who knows this software, that software, you know, has worked with this sort of programming, this sort of equipment. And then, you know, age is irrelevant to that because it might be someone who, let's say, recently decided to come out of the retirement, and actually they've been very recently trained on all of that, and actually they have now the newest knowledge of this, plus, you know, decades of other experience. So I think this kind of stereotype just doesn't hold up necessarily anymore. But also, stereotypes are remain stereotypes even in a particular context that are true, because there might be a young mother that does not wish to head that big project, but it does not mean that this assumption should just be put in place and you know, and just embedded into the organization. And I think, you know, being kind of compassionate and understanding that we live in a sexist, ageist, racist world, and we all have these stereotypes in us, every single person, you and I as well. But it's about what we do about this, and this sort of questioning about, like, okay, don't want someone like in that example, I don't want someone over 50. Okay, but what does that really mean in my head? Is it about the technology? So I can think, okay, so these are the requirements that actually I mean by this. If I'm talking about um, you know, the culture fit, I like to call it as, you know, instead of looking for a culture fit, let's look for like culture enrichment, you know. But is it something that, you know, I need someone who is happy to be I don't know, working, like maybe starting later and working later in the evenings because, you know, this is where our clients are more happy to have meetings. That is a requirement I might have. But, you know, saying I just need someone who is younger, well, that doesn't really hold up because, you know, young people have also different sort of you know, life choices as well. And, you know, we still live in this kind of very heteronormative aspect of, like, you know, everyone is straight, everyone has kids, and everyone over 50 is just a grandma.
Yeah. And that's the challenge, isn't it? And I sit there and I do challenge a lot of our clients. You know, you send them a CV and then you're chatting to them about the candidate and they're going, so how old are they? And have they got a degree? and how many years experience have they got? And it is sort of pushing back and questioning and going, talk to me about why you need to know this, because the reason why you need to know it is not why you're asking me that question.
Yeah.
And quite often I find that, they say, well, I need a certain level of experience to do this job because it's quite a complex job. That's not an age or a 5 years plus experience. That's
Exactly.
the person. That's the person that's going to dictate that. Right. So, okay. So if I know that that's the person, that's what we're going to look for. And, like we say with the over 50s, and it's the use of technology. Okay. So we need somebody who's competent on different pieces of software and can demonstrate that. It's got nothing to do with their age. That's just how competent they are. Because you can have somebody who's 21 who can't use whatever it is that you're using just because they're not very good at picking it up, and that's fine. So yeah, one of the things that we always try and do is kind of challenge back and go, well, talk to me about why these are important things for you to find out, because we can't ask that. You're not allowed to ask me. I'm not going to ask the candidates, but where has this come from? And then we can reframe it and go, okay, so there are different ways of asking different questions to get to that point. Or ultimately, that's what you're using me for, to try and find you the right person. So these are the things that I need to bear in mind so that we're finding you the right person with the right level of skills and experience. And I think it's obvious to a lot of business leaders that, you shouldn't always ask about age, but it does still happen. I think some of the things that they struggle with is, and you've touched on that, about kind of being a parent where they go, oh well, I can't have a new mum or somebody doing this because I might need overtime doing, or we do social things outside of work, and therefore you're indirectly discriminating against people who may not have childcare on an evening. So why can't you do things at a different time of day, for instance? And I think a lot of the indirect discrimination is things where people tend to trip themselves up, or saying, oh, well, I can't have that candidate because, their culture might mean that they don't like joining in with what we do when we celebrate month end, or they may not want to join in that because of their beliefs or their culture, so therefore they're probably not the right culture fit, are they? And and it's those kind of things, I think, which are more likely to trip you up, where there's less knowledge about things, and it's coming from the right place, but it's coming out in the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the kind of surprising thing is, when we talk about culture fit and what my staff likes to do, sometimes a good question to ask, and that's something that recruiters can definitely help with, is like, have you asked them if they like doing it? Have you actually asked if any of your colleagues, current staff, actually do not like the way you kind of organize the socializing and the kind of group outings? Have you ever actually considered that, the way you try to manage your team makes some people uncomfortable, but you just never provided a space for them to say that?
Yeah.
And, if we think about childcare, let's not forget we also have an aging population. So you might have people who, let's say, wouldn't necessarily be in the kind of age when they have little kids, but then they might have elderly parents that they take care of. And also asking yourself a question: why is my company willing to miss out on a fantastic talent because of the fact that someone might be doing in their kind of personal life?
Yeah.
Why is this a deal breaker for me that someone is a parent or someone has a disabled spouse, for instance? Like, why is this more important to me than what that person actually can bring to my business? That, I think, is, if you start unpicking it, it becomes almost like ridiculous that it's more important to me, essentially, if a person, like what that person does, after work, than what they can bring into my business, what experience they have, maybe decades of like work that they've done, maybe for my competitors, innovations they've done. Suddenly all of that just becomes irrelevant almost. And you are, as a business, you are going to miss out on incredible talent, simply because of the stereotypes you might be still holding, and because of you not really questioning why you're doing certain things, why you require certain things. And I think the teams that claim that everything is so great with us, and we just don't want to destroy the team dynamic, these are usually the teams that actually never really ask their staff what is it that they want, because it's the diversity is more than just ethnicity. It is more than age, it is more than gender. You have so many different aspects. If you think about social mobility, etc., etc. Have you ever thought about if some of your colleagues can afford to go out? Have you ever thought of that? So making sure that you, as a business owner, when you're working with a recruitment partner, like, you both are kind of asking questions about, are actually things working in my team the way I think they are working? And I think that's why so important it is so important to make sure that you're working with the right recruitment partners, because, like you said, like, you would never ask a candidate that question, but we know that there are still recruitment businesses out there that might actually ask a candidate, like, how old are you? Are you planning to have more children? And as a business owner, you want to make sure that you're working with recruitment businesses that are compliant and can be a partner on your ED&I journey. So definitely always recommend working with RAC members, because that those are actually businesses that are aware of the obligations that they have.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and you pointed to that in terms of asking your people. So we were working with a business last year, and they were really transparent about their ED&I journey. And I think the key thing there is journey. There is no destination, there is no end point, and we've talked about that already. But one of the things that they were doing was asking their people what was important to them. And they were looking at, what would you like us to celebrate as part of our ED&I journey? And they started getting feedback about, multiracial days, ethnic days, and things like that. And they said, that's absolutely fine. And if we start celebrating them, will you join in? And then it was, oh, hang on a minute. No, it's not as important to me. I just put it down because I thought we should. And it was that thing of, I think sometimes what happens is you end up doing things as a tick box exercise because you think you should, rather than what's important to your people. So I think, ask them what's important to them, but don't just do a superficial question. Really get down to the nitty gritty and go, what's important for you in terms of either the support we give you, or what we're going to celebrate, or what we can do on this journey. And if we do that, will you participate in that? Is that going to be something that you're passionate about? And, do you want to be part of that? Because I think as a race, we will all go, oh, well, we think it should be this. But you do sometimes say, because you think it's the proper thing to do.
Yeah. And that comes back to the authenticity point that we discussed earlier. And I think, going back to also the LinkedIn conversations and like how everyone seems to have it all figured out, something for companies to be aware of as well, that candidates will spot if all you do is, post something on social media. If you just say happy Ramadan, but your Muslim employees actually have zero support or during their fasting, or you have zero will to just understand how you can better support them, etc. So I think that's why it's okay to just start with the things that are important to your staff. Maybe it is not on this occasion South Asian Heritage Month, maybe it's something to do with menopause. And it's okay to, you as an employer are responding to the needs of your colleagues. It does not mean that you do not also have the responsibility to educate, and you as a business have, social responsibility to the community you're serving to address other issues as well. But it is okay, actually, it's very much encouraged to be authentic in the stuff that you're doing, because once again, it will, fill up all of the other cups as well. So for you to be authentic, that actually then helps you to, answer questions. Why are we doing this? Because this is something that our staff are passionate about, or this is something that the staff told us in a survey, or, in like a committee meeting and whatnot. And I think it's good to say, when we talk about ED&I, like I like to refer to do as a development instead of a journey, because I think for some companies then it's seen as like a little stroll, and sometimes can be seen like infantilizing it a little bit. But essentially what ED&I is about you hiring the best talent, you retaining the best talent, you making sure that the best talent is being promoted into the roles where they can actually showcase their best talent abilities. It is about, you winning new businesses, you supporting your clients, you differentiating yourself in a competitive market. So it's not about, the journey of hand holding and waving rainbow flags, but about authentic development of your business and about addressing the challenges that your business is already having. Like I always like to position ED&I as a solution rather than another thing that your business ought to be doing.
Yeah.
Do I struggle with hiring? Do I struggle with retention? Do I struggle with sales? ED&I can be a solution to all of these when you understand that, ED&I is people, and people are your staff, your candidates, your clients, your suppliers. So it is going to have a positive impact on all of that. And changing that mindset into like, how can that help me solve the problems I'm having, can be can make such a difference.
Yeah.
Because instead of thinking like, what do I need to be doing in this? Think of like, what are the challenges I'm actually having, and how can that help me address them and help me build my brand as a employer of choice, as a supplier of choice, and as a business that is socially responsible, and it makes sense to do business with me.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And I think, that employer of choice thing is key in the current climate. There's so much competition for the best talent out there. And I think, we've touched a lot on some really good advice and guidance on how to think about ED&I, and also kind of your adverts and your job descriptions. I think what I'd like to do before we finish is touch a little bit on reasonable adjustments in terms of interviews and workplaces. Because I think, again, a lot of the businesses that we work with don't think about how easy some of these reasonable adjustments can be, and therefore are not doing anything. And I think if we can give some key little bits of advice that people can take away with them, that kind of recruitment process will be a lot more beneficial for them. One of the things that we find is that if you've got somebody who is potentially hard of hearing, inviting them into an interview, maybe in a building where there isn't a space where it's clear for them to hear everything properly, or it might be quite a busy and noisy environment. Quite often they would opt for a virtual interview where they can put the captions on. And things like that I think are really, really straightforward and very, very simple to opt to do, or having some sort of interpretation software if it's somebody from another country who's come to the UK to study and find work. The other thing that I find with virtual interviews is they can help somebody who's neurodiverse as well. The thought of going into a busy open plan office to walk through that and go to an interview room, if you are neurodiverse, can scare you enough to not go to the interview. But if you were to be offered a virtual interview, and then also, suggested that if you don't want to have your camera on, if you feel safer with the camera off and you feel more confident speaking without your camera on, again, it's taking those barriers out. But they're, free small adjustments, aren't they, that, people can make. The other thing for me about neurodiverse candidates is I sort of say to our clients, walk yourself from entrance to the building to where that interview is going to be, and in that room, and actually look at everything. And is there going to be too much overstimulation there for somebody who could be neurodiverse? Is there too much going on the walls? What's the lighting like? What are the people doing? And then in the interview room, are the things that you can do? Can you dim the lights? Can you take some of those posters off the wall? Can you take the clutter out? If they're overstimulated, they're not going to perform at their best. And you said before about, somebody promoting their best self. And I think the interview is the time that you need to allow them to showcase their best self. An interview is not trying to catch somebody out. You're trying to see if they're the right person for the job. So you want them to present themselves in the best light. There's a lot of things on social media over the last sort of 12 months about, should we or should we not provide interview questions in advance? And again, businesses that are going, no, I don't want to do that. And you go, well, are you trying to catch them out by throwing that question at them? If these are competency style questions, why would you not give them in advance so that those people can sit there and go, hang on a minute, let me try and remember a time when I dealt with conflict in the workplace, or what, a challenging situation between colleagues, or whatever the questions are that you want to ask. You want them to give you really good examples, and, you can probe more and work out if it is a made up story, or, if it genuinely did happen. But, if they can give you some really good real time examples of where they've done those things, isn't that what you want to hear by asking them questions?
Absolutely. No, I think there's a couple of things to pick up on here. First and foremost, I would say that it's massively important for you to train your hiring managers. For them to work with recruiters to actually understand what inclusive recruitment process looks like, because it really that almost doesn't make sense for you to provide, let's say an adjustment. Oh, you don't have to have your camera on. If your hiring manager is going to say like, well, clearly I'm not hiring this candidate because I didn't even get to see them, right? So making sure that you start with that your hiring managers are actually prepared to actively participate in an inclusive recruitment process. That's the first thing. Second of all, I would say that there isn't a one size fits all. Therefore, asking this question of like, how can I help you thrive in this recruitment process is really powerful. I would agree, though, that there are certain things that you could, have readily available. Maybe some of the more popular, adjustments, like you said, like closed captions or translations. But something that is also massively useful, especially for neurodivergent candidates, but not only, is the structure, as you just said. So even if you're not happy to share interview questions, can you share the structure in advance? There will be these people, include their pictures. There will be these people. They will ask you 7 questions. Questions will be about this, and that. This is a picture of the room where you will be interviewed. And here is a map or maybe a video of like how you can get to that interview, because that is also helpful, just to someone who's never been in such an office building before. So these are some kind of things that you can have at your disposal kind of readily.
Yeah.
But there is something about just making sure that you understand that one size doesn't fit all. Someone might also prefer an in-person interview because on the screen they just struggle to read people's emotions. So they would actually prefer an in-person interview. Is that an option? Also, that might be more useful for people who do not necessarily have living conditions that are really appropriate to have a work interview. So that's another kind of useful thing to remember. So I would say that start with making sure that your hiring managers are ready to participate in it.
Yeah.
Ask your candidates about how can you help them thrive. But the things you mentioned or I listed can be, things you can have readily available. Let's say sometimes it's, I don't know, different also hardware, like it's sort of this different equipment. Let's say, one hand keyboard, for instance, or noise canceling headphones. Just making sure that you are aware of those things, but let your candidate or your employee kind of tell you what it is that they want. This is not their responsibility to educate you on their, let's say, disability, but they are the expert in terms of what they need. It is then your responsibility as an employer to maybe do some of your own research and understand kind of how you can support them better. But this is, they are the experts in terms of what they might need to work on a daily basis.
And I think that's right. What most of the time when we speak to candidates and, and we do sort of say to them, is there anything that we can do to support you on this recruitment journey? And quite often they're the ones that will say to you, actually, yes, I am hard of hearing. So if the interviews can be virtual, I can put captions on and that will make a massive difference to me. I'm not great with lip reading. So the virtual interviews do work so much better, unless they've got the loops in the building and then, they can hear. Or it might be somebody that says, I've got difficulty walking. So if there's stairs, I'm going to struggle. So, if there's a ground floor office where we can interview and therefore obviously work ground floor, that will make a massive difference. I'm okay on a couple of steps, but not a full staircase. Or, all these different things we always try and get led by the candidates and say to them, you're the person living your life. How do we make this a more positive journey for you? What adjustments may you need? And let us try and support you in that. And we will then speak to the clients and see if they can accommodate that. And we will do our best to make it as comfortable and as more of a positive journey as possible for you, so that when they get the job, they're more likely to stay because it's been a positive recruitment journey rather than just a number of barriers that they've had to overcome just to get to an interview.
Absolutely.
And if that recruitment journey is positive, you are more likely to then retain these people. I think a lot of businesses forget that a candidate's first impressions of your company is the recruitment process. And whether you are advertising and interviewing for a job direct and doing it yourself, or you are using a recruiter, that candidate's impressions of you start with a job advert that they see that they want to apply for, and it goes right the way through to job offer. And then from there, onboarding, training, probation. So you've got to work hard in today's climate. You've got to work hard to get it right from that very first moment that you advertise a job right the way through. You can't take your eye off the ball at all. You've got to make it as positive as possible to recruit and then retain these people.
Absolutely. And I think just one of the things just to add, that when we talked about kind of the ad being the first thing that the candidate sees, is think also about the physical requirements of the job you're offering. I see it more and more, but I see it especially more in kind of public sector actually organizations, but still not that popular. If you think about the so-called office jobs, actually saying something like along the lines of, this role requires, let's say, looking at a screen for 8 hours. This role might require a lot of sitting. That actually showcases that to a candidate, that you understand that might be a challenge to some people.
Yeah.
And that you're willing to have a conversation about this, because we often come from a mindset of everyone knows that, you sit a lot at your desk, right? Every job is like that. No, it's not. And also, do you offer standing desks? Do you offer, any, I don't know, screen protectors, or do you offer any eye tests, etc., to accommodate that as well? So absolutely, it is something to also think about. And while I see it more and more, it's still not an established practice. And kind of just drawing on your point when you say, make sure that the whole experience of recruitment is a positive one. I also want to encourage employers to ensure that ED&I is a part of that, even if a candidate doesn't ask. So, when you introduce your company during an interview, you mention something about the stuff that you do around ED&I, because some candidates might not feel confident enough to ask, or might be afraid that, oh, what if they don't do anything about ED&I and then I come off bad?
Yeah.
Just make sure that this is something that, you include in the job description, but also mention in the interview, explain a bit more during that time, that it is then a part of your onboarding process, of your induction process, that from the get-go, you inform a new candidate that here are the resources that, can support you. Here's how you make a complaint. Here is the, group that represents, all of the employees when it comes to ED&I. So even if a candidate doesn't ask, just make sure that it just becomes a part of your standard practice.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with, an interview is a two-way process. You're interviewing them for the job, but they're interviewing you to see if they want to work for you. So you have to sell yourself and the company. And you've got to sit there and sell the job. You've got to talk to them about what your sustainability goals are, what your CSR is, what that team building work is that you're doing, and equally that ED&I. It should all be part and parcel of this is who we are. This is our business. This is who we are. These are the things that are important to us. And it should just be part of the same conversation. It shouldn't be a big thing or a little thing. It's just part of that same conversation. So as you're talking about the fact that, we've got a paperless office and we encourage walk-in one-to-ones, and, we offer yoga on a lunchtime to support with your health and well-being. We also have an ED&I committee that meet once a month and look at this, that and the other. And, we've got all the company cars are electric, and, this blah, blah, whatever it might be. It's matter of fact, it's who you are. And those candidates sat there, whether all of that is important to them or not, they will then take that on board, and they will then take the bits that mean something to them and go, I want to work for this company, or no, I don't. But if you just sit there and go, this is the job and this is what you're doing, you might then just put them off. You are never going to put somebody off by talking about all the other stuff, but you might put them off by not talking about it.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that, usually people who are looking for jobs, they might be interviewing at more than one company.
Yeah.
So the job description is likely very similar.
Yeah.
But what is different is, the culture bit, the sustainability bit, the aspects of like team building, etc., etc. This is a point that you can make it clear that you are the employer of choice. That even, let's say, that other company pays £500 more a year, that you might be actually, what that candidate is looking for.
Yeah. And I think in the world that we're in at the moment, it's the other stuff that is more important to the candidates at the moment rather than the salary. Yes, the salary is important. They've got bills to pay. But in the grand scheme of things, if it was a choice between two jobs, it's not the duties that are going to make them decide. It's the business that's going to make them decide, and what you offer as a business to support that person. And that's the thing I think that we should probably leave on, is remember to talk about everything. Don't assume that they know what you do. Unless you talk about it, they won't know. And ED&I is a positive thing to talk about, and it's a positive thing to approach. And really start at the beginning and do it in baby steps, and baby steps are enough as long as you do start. Burying your head in the sand, I don't think is the way forward. It's not going anywhere. We have to be more inclusive. And if you want to attract and retain the best people, you've got to really think about this. And more often than not, the people that I speak to have done so much, they just haven't realised it. And they are so inclusive, they just don't know that they are. And so there's just so much more that people can talk about, and talking about it then dispels the myths of if I get the language wrong or I use the wrong terminology and all that kind of stuff. Just start talking, and then people would be more receptive to have them conversations with you.
Absolutely. Just retain that learning mindset and make sure that your community, your staff, your candidates know that you are on a learning journey. Then if and when any sort of mistake happens, you then are protected in a sense of that, you knew that there are still things you don't know, and you're happy to learn, you're happy to implement the learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could talk about this for hours on end. But no, thank you so much for your time today, Olga. It has been amazing. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I hope that all the listeners have got a lot of takeaways from this. There's loads and loads of guidance, I think, that we've given. Both the REC and myself have created ED&I guides. So if anybody listening does want to see a copy of either or both of those, you can get in touch with us. The information is on our website, kdrecruitment.co.uk, but it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Olga, and I will look forward to speaking to all our listeners on the next podcast.
Thank you, lovely.